So the video totally got me. My videos are only in 15-minute formats because that's what Screencast-O-Matic gives to us in its free version. And I like that they're 15 minutes. It keeps you from wandering. It kind of gives you a small amount of time with a lot of information. But I totally got caught red-handed. I was totally thinking about what was going on with these guys and not paying attention to the time. So let's finish up with King Creole. I was remarking on this particular picture and how much fun they were having in the picture. So I do think that these bands are more natural, the way that they have established their style, but it's up to you to give it a little more listen to establish a style that you feel comfortable talking about. I would like to talk about one other group before we actually get into Paul Whiteman, because Sissel and Blake were a duo that was actually part of James Reese Europe's band. And what Sissel and Blake did is they ended up actually forming their own duo with Broadway. And they were the first Black Broadway production to ever really hit success. And so they became really known as a duo of songwriting duo. The name of their Broadway hit was called Shuffle Along, and so it was the first all-black musical to be presented on Broadway, so they are kind of the pioneers in that particular era, so I wanted to make sure to mention them before I move on. Now the last jazz group that I want to mention before we move on to the crooners is actually Paul Whiteman. Paul Whiteman, although he acknowledged the problems that the Black musicians were having during the time, he actually has a saying, a quote from him that said, "Jazz arrived 300 years earlier on a boat in chains," which is kind of poignant in its own way. At the time that he recognizes that a lot of this music came from earlier African-American traditions. He didn't hire any African-American people to work in his bands. His bands were all white. And you may hear that lack of influence in his music. That's, again, up to you to decipher. His music is very smooth. It's a different sort of feeling to it than King Oliver's Creole's music. But Paul Whiteman was a very interesting man. His music was very Hollywood-esque. Like I said, it's a very smooth character about it. And the other interesting thing that Paul Whiteman did is he actually created franchises, kind of like the Castles, a little bit later on, where he franchised his bands all the way across the country so that any band that might be playing his music was standardized, which was kind of interesting in the music industry at that time. George Gershwin, who I'm going to talk about even more, who I absolutely love, actually worked with Paul Whiteman on a lot of material. But let's listen to this particular tune of Paul Whiteman's band. This is called Whispering. So you can hear his style is one that's very smooth. It kind of seems like it doesn't have any rhythms or any instruments that kind of stick out. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you're doing with the music. It's probably great to dance to, but as far as just absolute listening environment, it doesn't have anything that sticks out to me that says, wow, that's really cool. It's just very kind of fluid in that way. Now, George Gershwin added a lot of dynamism to his particular brand of music that he wrote, and we'll be talking about him soon because he worked a lot with Paul Whiteman. But Paul Whiteman was a great businessman and fostered a lot of learning about jazz and the jazz ideas across the nation based upon his franchising development. So before I go on to talk about crooners and standards, I have to mention the Latin influence in this time period. Don Azpiazu was kind of the first Cuban band leader to gain prominence, and he has a tune called El Manicero. It's in the book, but this page number is wrong. I actually just changed that for you. It's page 102. And they talk about the influence of the clave, which they refer to, I'm looking actually in the book on page 102, it says it's the heartbeat of Cuban music. I'm going to point out this what's called the rhythmic signature pattern here. I actually love this tune. It feels so just down to earth, people oriented. I could absolutely see myself walking around Cuba if I ever have the opportunity to go there, which I hope I do someday. It seems like a really awesome place to visit. And just going up to a street vendor and buying a hot package of peanuts. It sounds so delicious and so right, and he makes it just feel like you're absolutely there. So let's listen to a little bit of this tune. And I'm going to point out the clave. I actually think he's the trombone player, and he's sitting in with the claves while he's not playing the trombones. I'm going to show this to you right now. Right here. This is the clave. Very unassuming, but an important part of the Latin beat. So what I was just clapping was the clave part. This guy down here. And we have so many interesting rhythmical ideas going on over the claves. Ba, 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 ba. And this idea of the clave does not change throughout the entire piece. So I want you to go back and listen to this, if at all possible. Listen to the whole thing, because it is absolutely awesome. And it just makes you want to get up and dance. It's so cool. I love this. And it actually brings me to my own childhood when I would watch probably the most famous Cuban band leader after school on I Love Lucy. And his most famous tune is Babalu. And of course, I'm talking about Desi Arnaz. So let's take a little bit of a listen, because Don Azpiazu came before Desi Arnaz in the 1940s, and he sort of paved the way for Desi Arnaz to be on television, which was a big deal because there were no Cuban band leaders on television. So the fact that he was able to make his way through Hollywood in the 1940s and become actually an excellent producer and had this amazing company called Desi Lu. It really started earlier than it sort of paved the way for Desi Arnaz to make a life for himself. Again, I'm going to throw this up on external links for you guys to see it. This Desi Arnaz is just awesome. And it really, like I said, Don Azpiazu actually paved the way for future Cuban band leaders to make a name for themselves, with Desi Arnaz, of course, being the most famous. So as you move into chapter 4, we have to talk about Tin Pan Alley composers. These were the people that wrote the songs that became really famous in the 1930s, and then moving into the 1940s, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I have to start out by talking about Irving Berlin. He wrote so many amazing songs. Probably my two most famous in my own life is God Bless America and White Christmas. Both of these, of course, White Christmas we see at the holidays every year. God Bless America is something that's played time and time again at every patriotic event that you can ever think of. But probably the standard that I love the best, the one that's actually the most fun to listen to, is Putting on the Ritz. So let's take a quick listen, so just so that you're familiar with Irving Berlin.
Have you seen the well-to-do upon Leonard Avenue, on that famous thoroughfare with their noses in the air? High hats and colored collars, white hats and $15, spending every dime for a wonderful time. If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where Harlem lives? Putting on the Ritz, mango gown on the levee, a high round from down the levee, all it is, putting on the Ritz.
So Irving Berlin was hugely famous. He wrote like 500, at least 500 songs that were famous. So he's very well known for his songwriting output, and he is really probably the biggest star of Tin Pan Alley. Now, Tin Pan Alley, I talked about a little bit earlier, was a building where a lot of these songwriters, composers would sit in a little cubicle with the piano and try to figure out the next hit. And Irving Berlin was really great at coming up with a lot of mega hits. Now, a lot of these songs actually had a particular form. It's called Tin Pan Alley song form, and it's an AABA. Now, if you're wondering what that means, it's actually in the text. So this is actually on page 107 and 108. It kind of explains the AABA idea. The B section actually ends up being the bridge, but AABA is really a standard song form that you're going to hear throughout history. It really gets started here, but you hear it throughout even our music today. And so it's a very prominent song form, and I'm going to go through that with My Blue Heaven. The other thing I want to mention about Tin Pan Alley is it is kind of a middle class kind of idea that one day you're going to own a house, that you're going to go through a series of love, you're going to be totally in love, and you're going to have heartbreak and love again, and at some point, hopefully, you're going to have this romantic love. You get married, and you have a family, and life's good. And that's kind of the idea behind a lot of these Tin Pan Alley songs. And the one that we've chosen is My Blue Heaven. So My Blue Heaven is actually a movie from, I think it's like 1990, from Steve Martin is in it. And of course, that's what I remember about this. But let's listen to the actual song, and I'm going to go through the AABA format with you.
Day is ending, birds are landing, back to the shelter, each little nest they love.
So this is the original verse.
Lovers falling, what makes the world go round? Nothing but love.
This is A.
An evening is mine, I hurry to my blue heaven.
Now we have the same music. So letter A again.
A little white light will lead you to my blue heaven.
Then we have a different set of music. So letter B.
A fireplace, a cozy room, a little nest that's nestled where the roses bloom.
And back to letter A. We hear the same music.
Baby, make